The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard of the Martinez ranch, but inside the small adobe house, darkness had already settled over Maria's heart. She sat at the wooden table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, listening to the heated whispers coming from the next room. 3 years. 3 long years of marriage, and still no child had blessed her union with Diego. "She's cursed," came her mother-in-law's sharp voice through the thin walls. "What kind of woman can't give her husband a son? My Diego deserves better than this barren field of a wife." Maria's fingers trembled as she traced the worn wood grain of the table. She had heard these words so many times they had carved themselves into her soul like water wearing away stone. Every month that passed without the hope of new life growing inside her was another nail in the coffin of her worth as a woman in this harsh frontier territory of New Mexico. The year was 1875, and in this unforgiving land where survival depended on strong families and many hands to work the ranch, a woman who couldn't bear children was seen as broken. Maria had tried everything the local curandera had suggested. She drank bitter teas made from strange herbs, wore special stones close to her skin, and prayed until her knees were raw from kneeling on the chapel's cold stone floor. Nothing worked. Diego had grown distant over the months. Where once he had held her close and whispered sweet promises of their future children, now he barely looked at her. He spent his evenings drinking with the other men in town, and Maria often heard them laughing about wives who knew their place and gave their husbands strong sons to carry on the family name. The ranch was struggling too. The cattle had gotten sick last winter, and they'd lost nearly half the herd. The vegetables in their small garden had withered during the terrible drought that seemed to go on forever. Bills were piling up like tumbleweeds against a fence, and Maria's father spent sleepless nights walking the property, counting and recounting their few remaining animals. "We can't keep going like this, Rosa," she heard her father say to her mother one evening when they thought she was sleeping. "The bankman came by again today. If we don't pay what we owe by month's end, we'll lose everything our family has built." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. "What can we do, Carlos?"
"We have nothing left to sell. Nothing except—" Her father's voice trailed off, but Maria knew what he was thinking.
She had become a burden rather than a blessing. A daughter who had failed in her most basic duty as a woman. The conversation that would change everything happened on a Tuesday morning when the heat was already shimmering off the ground even though the sun had barely cleared the mountains. Maria was hanging clothes on the line when she saw the dust cloud approaching. A fancy black carriage pulled by 4 beautiful horses was coming down their dirt road. The man who stepped out of that carriage looked like he owned the whole world. His clothes were fine and expensive, his boots polished to a mirror shine despite the dusty roads. This was Victor Blackwood, the richest cattle baron in the territory. He owned more land than most small towns, and his herds numbered in the thousands. Maria watched from behind the hanging sheets as her parents hurried out to greet him. She couldn't hear every word, but she caught enough to understand that Mr. Blackwood had come with a business proposition. "I need reliable help at my ranch," his deep voice carried across the yard. "Someone to help my wife with the household duties. The work is hard, but the pay is generous enough to cover certain debts that might be troubling good people like yourselves." Maria's heart began to race. She pressed closer to the sheets, straining to hear more. "My daughter," her father began hesitantly. "Yes, I've heard about your daughter," Mr. Blackwood interrupted smoothly. "A married woman who hasn't been blessed with children. Sometimes a change of scenery can help with such problems, and even if it doesn't, well, there are many ways a woman can be useful besides bearing children." The way he said those last words made Maria's skin crawl, though she couldn't quite understand why. That evening, her parents called her to sit with them at the kitchen table. The conversation that followed would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Maria, mija," her mother began, her eyes unable to meet her daughter's gaze. "We have been given an opportunity. Mr. Blackwood has offered you a position at his ranch." "But I'm married to Diego," Maria protested, confusion flooding her voice. Her father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Diego has agreed to the arrangement. You would work for Mr. Blackwood for 2 years to help pay off our debts. After that, you could return if things change." "If I finally have a baby, you mean?" Maria said quietly, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. The silence that followed was answer enough. "You don't understand," her mother said desperately. "We could lose everything. The ranch, the house, everything your grandfather built with his own hands. This is our only choice. But Maria understood perfectly. She understood that her parents were so ashamed of their barren daughter that they were willing to send her away like a piece of property to be sold. She understood that Diego, the man who had promised to love her forever, was so embarrassed by her failure to give him children that he was eager to be rid of her. "How much?" she asked, her voice steady despite the breaking of her heart. "What?" her father stammered. "How much is Mr. Blackwood paying for me? It's not like that, Maria. You're not being sold. You're going to work—" "How much?" she repeated, her father's shoulders sagged. "Enough to save the ranch and pay Diego what he needs to start over." The room spun around her. They were selling her, their own daughter, and Diego was getting paid to let his wife go. That night, Maria packed her few belongings into an old leather satchel. She folded her wedding dress carefully, though she doubted she would ever wear it again. She tucked her grandmother's rosary into the bottom of the bag, hoping it might bring her some comfort in whatever future awaited her. Before dawn, Mr. Blackwood's carriage returned. Maria kissed her parents goodbye, tasting the salt of their tears mixed with her own. Diego was nowhere to be seen. He couldn't even face her on this last morning. As the carriage rolled away from the only home she had ever known, Maria pressed her face to the small window and watched her family's ranch disappear behind a cloud of dust. She was 22 years old, and her life as she knew it was over. The other women in the territory would whisper about her for years to come. They would shake their heads and cluck their tongues about the girl whose parents had been forced to send her away because she couldn't do a woman's most basic job. They would use her story as a warning to their own daughters about what happened to women who failed to fulfill their purpose. But Maria didn't know yet that this ending was actually a beginning. She didn't know that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you becomes the door to the best thing that ever could. All she knew was that she was alone, unwanted, and heading toward an uncertain future with a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. The carriage wheels turned steadily, carrying her toward a destiny she could never have imagined. The Blackwood Ranch stretched across the horizon like a small kingdom, with buildings that seemed to go on forever and cattle dotting the landscape as far as the eye could see. Maria had never seen such wealth, but as the carriage pulled up to the big house, she felt no wonder or excitement. Only a cold dread that settled in her stomach like a stone. Mrs. Victoria Blackwood stood waiting on the wraparound porch, her arms crossed and her face set in hard lines. She was a thin woman with sharp features and eyes that seemed to look right through you. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it stretched the skin around her temples, and her expensive dress was the color of dried blood. "So this is the girl," Victoria said, walking around Maria like she was inspecting a horse at market. "Smaller than I expected. And those hands look soft. We'll have to fix that." Mr. Blackwood tipped his hat to his wife. "I'll leave you ladies to get acquainted. I have business in town." He climbed back into his carriage without another word, leaving Maria standing alone with her satchel in the dusty yard. "Well, don't just stand there gaping," Victoria snapped. "Bring your things. I'll show you where you'll be staying." Maria followed her around the big house to a small windowless room attached to the back of the building. It was barely large enough for a narrow cot and a wooden crate that served as a table. The walls were unpainted wood and the floor was dirt covered with a thin layer of straw. "This is yours," Victoria said, standing in the doorway. "You'll wake before dawn to start the fires and begin breakfast. You'll work until after the evening meal is cleaned up. Sundays you get a half day to rest, but only after the family's Sunday dinner is prepared and served." Maria set her satchel on the cot and looked around the tiny space that would be her home for the next 2 years. It was smaller than the chicken coop back at her family's ranch. "The rules are simple," Victoria continued, her voice sharp as a blade. "You speak when spoken to. You don't enter the main house unless you're working. You don't talk to the ranch hands unless it's about work. And you don't give me any reason to regret taking you in." Over the following days, Maria learned that Victoria Blackwood was a woman whose heart had been turned to stone by her own pain. She had been married to Victor for 15 years and had never been able to have children. But instead of finding compassion for Maria's similar struggle, Victoria seemed to hate her even more because of it. "At least I have the excuse of age," Victoria would say while watching Maria scrub the kitchen floor. "You're young and healthy and still useless as a woman. What kind of failure are you?" The work was backbreaking. Maria's day began at 4 in the morning when she would light the fire in the big kitchen stove and begin preparing breakfast for the family and the dozen ranch hands who worked the property. Her hands, once soft from her easier life as a married woman, quickly became cracked and bleeding from the constant washing and scrubbing. After breakfast, she would clean the entire main house, which had 12 rooms and seemed to collect dust faster than she could wipe it away. The floors had to be swept and mopped, the furniture dusted and polished, the windows cleaned until they sparkled. Victoria would follow behind her with a white glove, checking for any speck of dirt that Maria might have missed. "Do it again," was Victoria's favorite phrase, and this time do it right. The afternoons were spent preparing dinner, which was an elaborate affair even on ordinary days. Victoria demanded meals fit for visiting dignitaries, with multiple courses and perfectly prepared vegetables from the garden. Maria had to learn to cook dishes she had never heard of, and any mistake meant starting over from the beginning. The ranch hands largely ignored her, as Victoria had instructed. They would eat their meals in silence and leave their dirty plates for her to collect. A few of them looked at her with something that might have been pity, but none dared to show her any kindness where Victoria might see. There was one hand, a man named Roberto, who sometimes left his plate a little less messy than the others. Once he quietly said gracias when she served his food, but Victoria's sharp glare silenced him immediately. "That girl is here to work, not to make friends," Victoria announced to the dining room. "Anyone caught fraternizing with the help will find themselves looking for work elsewhere." The worst part wasn't the physical labor or even the cruel words. It was the way Victoria would stand behind her while she worked, making comments designed to cut deep into her soul. "I wonder what your husband is doing tonight," Victoria would say while Maria was on her hands and knees scrubbing the parlor floor, probably enjoying his freedom from a wife who can't give him what every man wants. "I heard he's been seen around town with the widow Thompson. She has 3 children, you know. Proof that she knows how to be a real woman." These words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Maria would scrub harder, trying to wash away the images that Victoria's cruelty painted in her mind. But it was in the darkest moments that Maria discovered something unexpected. Behind the main house, past the vegetable garden that fed the family, there was a small patch of ground that no one seemed to care about. It was rocky and hard, but during her brief moments of rest, Maria began to work the soil with her fingers. She planted seeds that she saved from the vegetables she prepared for meals. Tiny tomato seeds, beans that had split during cooking, even wildflower seeds that she found blowing across the prairie. Working with the earth reminded her of helping her grandmother in the garden when she was a little girl. Before anyone expected her to be anything more than a child who loved to watch things grow. The plants that sprouted in her secret garden became her only source of hope. Each tiny green shoot was proof that she could still nurture life, even if that life couldn't grow inside her own body. She would sneak out after the evening work was done to water her plants with kitchen scraps and tend to them by moonlight. Victoria never found the garden, hidden as it was behind a storage shed. It became Maria's sanctuary, the one place where she could remember who she used to be before the world taught her to hate herself. Months passed in this routine of cruelty and survival. Maria's body grew thin from the hard work and small portions of food she was allowed. Her hands became permanently stained from the harsh soaps and dyes she worked with. But something inside her, something Victoria couldn't touch, remained unbroken. She began to realize that Victoria's cruelty came from a place of deep pain. The older woman was lashing out at Maria because seeing her was like looking in a mirror that reflected all of Victoria's own failures and disappointments. They were both women who had been told their worth depended on their ability to bear children, and both had failed by that measure. But where Maria was learning to find other sources of strength, Victoria had let the failure consume her completely. One evening, while Maria was cleaning up after dinner, she overheard Victoria and Victor arguing in the next room. "She's too thin," Victor was saying. "If she gets sick and dies, I'll have wasted my money." "She's stronger than she looks," Victoria replied coldly. "And if she's not, well, there are plenty of other failures where she came from." That night, lying on her narrow cot in the tiny room, Maria made a promise to herself. She would survive this. She would find a way to endure Victoria's cruelty and emerge from this trial stronger than before. She didn't know how yet, but she refused to let this place break her spirit completely. Outside her door, the wind howled across the empty prairie, carrying with it the promise that change was coming. Maria just had to hold on long enough to see what that change might bring. The morning started like any other, with Maria lighting the kitchen fire before the sun had even thought about rising. She had been at the Blackwood Ranch for 8 months now, and her body had learned to move through the daily routine even while her mind was still heavy with sleep. But today felt different somehow. The air itself seemed to be holding its breath. The horses in the corral were restless, pacing and snorting in a way that made the ranch hands frown and shake their heads. Even the cattle in the distant pastures seemed nervous, clustering together instead of spreading out to graze as they usually did. Storm coming, old Roberto muttered as he passed through the kitchen for his morning coffee. Animals always know before we do, but the sky was clear, painted in the soft pink and gold of dawn without a single cloud to be seen. Victoria was in an especially foul mood that morning, finding fault with everything Maria did. The coffee was too weak, then too strong when Maria made a fresh pot. The eggs were undercooked, then burned when she made them again. The floor that Maria had scrubbed until her knees were raw was somehow still dirty in Victoria's eyes. "You're worthless today," Victoria snapped, standing over Maria as she re-cleaned the same spot on the wooden floor for the third time. More worthless than usual, if that's even possible. Around mid-morning, Victor and 6 of his men rode out to check on the cattle in the northern pasture and to pick up supplies from the trading post 2 hours away. This was routine, something they did twice a week, but today their departure left the ranch feeling strangely empty. Only Roberto and 2 younger hands remained behind to watch over the property. They seemed nervous too, checking and rechecking the gates and looking toward the horizon more often than usual. Maria was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard it. A sound like thunder, but different, rhythmic, getting closer. Her hands stopped moving on the wet sheet she was pinning up, and she listened with every fiber of her being. Horses. Many horses moving fast. The sound grew louder, and then she saw them. A group of Apache warriors cresting the hill to the east, their horses flying across the ground like they had wings. There were maybe 15 of them painted for war, and they were heading straight for the ranch. Maria dropped the wet sheet and ran toward the main house, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had heard stories about Apache raids, whispered tales that made children hide under their blankets and grown men check their weapons before going to sleep. "Mrs. Blackwood," she called out as she burst through the kitchen door. "Riders coming, Apache." Victoria appeared in the doorway, her face going white as paper when she saw Maria's expression. How many? Many. Maybe 15 or more. The sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the bunkhouse. Shouts and screams filled the air as Roberto and the other hands tried to defend the ranch. Victoria grabbed Maria's arm with fingers like iron claws. "The cellar," she said, her voice shaking. "We have to get to the root cellar." They ran together across the kitchen and down the narrow stairs into the dark space beneath the house where vegetables and preserved foods were stored. Victoria pulled the heavy wooden door shut above them and slid the bolt home, plunging them into complete darkness. They huddled together in the cramped space, listening to the chaos above. Horses thundered past the house. Men shouted in a language Maria didn't understand, mixed with Spanish and English curses from the ranch hands. Gunshots cracked like whips and something heavy crashed to the ground. Victoria was praying under her breath the same words over and over. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death." The fighting seemed to go on forever, but was probably only minutes. Then suddenly there was silence. A silence so complete it felt heavy as a blanket. They waited in the darkness, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. Maria's legs were cramping from crouching in the small space, but she didn't dare shift position. Victoria's hand was still gripping her arm so tightly it would leave bruises. Then they heard footsteps above. Slow, deliberate steps walking through the kitchen. Something crashed to the floor and Victoria flinched so hard she nearly cried out. The footsteps stopped directly above the cellar door. Maria held her breath until her lungs burned. Beside her, Victoria had gone completely still, as if she thought she could become invisible through sheer will. After what felt like hours, the footsteps moved away. They heard more sounds from other parts of the house, furniture being moved, drawers being opened. The raiders were searching for something. When the house finally fell silent again, they waited even longer before Victoria slowly, carefully unbolted the cellar door and pushed it open just a crack. Sunlight streamed down the stairs so bright after the darkness that it hurt their eyes. "Stay here," Victoria whispered, but Maria was already following her up the stairs. The kitchen was a disaster. Pots and pans were scattered across the floor. Chairs overturned, the window above the sink broken. But it could have been so much worse. They crept through the house together, surveying the damage. The raiders had been looking for weapons and valuable items, but they hadn't destroyed everything out of pure meanness. It was clear they had come for a specific purpose. Outside, the picture was grimmer. Roberto lay motionless near the bunkhouse, and one of the younger hands was nowhere to be seen. The other had been wounded in the leg, but was alive, sitting against the corral fence with his hand pressed to a bloody gash. The horses were gone. All of them. The corral that had held 20 fine animals that morning was empty, except for broken fence posts and churned up dirt. They took the horses, the wounded man said when he saw them. His name was Tommy, and he couldn't be more than 18 years old. That's all they wanted. The horses. Victoria was staring at the empty corral with a strange expression on her face. Those horses were worth more than this entire ranch, she said quietly. Victor will be furious. Maria was looking at something else. Near the back corner of the house, close to where her secret garden grew, there were hoof prints in the soft earth. One horse had stood there for several minutes based on how deep the prints were, and there was something else. A single eagle feather stuck in the ground near the largest hoof print, like it had been placed there deliberately. She walked over and picked up the feather, turning it over in her hands. It was perfect, unmarked by the chaos that had just swept through the ranch. Someone had left it there on purpose, but why? When she looked up, she felt eyes watching her. There, on the ridge to the north, sat a lone rider on horseback. Too far away to make out details, but she could tell he was looking directly at her. As soon as she spotted him, he turned his horse and disappeared over the hill. Maria, Victoria's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Stop standing around and help me tend to Tommy's wound. She tucked the feather into her apron pocket and hurried to help, but her mind kept returning to that moment when she had felt someone watching her. Most of the raiders had been painted for war, their faces and bodies decorated with symbols she didn't understand. But this one, the one who had stayed behind to watch, had seemed different somehow. When Victor returned with his men later that afternoon and saw the empty corral, his rage was terrible to witness. He cursed and kicked at anything in his path, promising revenge on the Apache who had dared to steal from him. We'll get them back, he swore, his face red with fury. Every last horse and the hides of the men who took them. But Maria wasn't thinking about revenge or stolen horses. She was thinking about the eagle feather hidden in her pocket, and the feeling that her life had just taken another unexpected turn. The Apache raid hadn't been the end of something. It had been the beginning. 3 days after the raid, Maria was working in her secret garden when she heard the soft whinny of a horse. She froze, her hand still buried in the dark earth where she had been planting seeds saved from the kitchen scraps. The sound had come from behind the storage shed where no horse should be. Slowly, quietly, she stood and brushed the dirt from her hands. The ranch was still on edge after the Apache attack, and Victor had posted guards around the property. But those guards were watching the main approaches, not this forgotten corner behind the buildings. Maria crept toward the sound, her heart beating fast but not with fear. Something told her this wasn't another raid. This felt different, more like a secret being shared than a threat being made. When she rounded the corner of the shed, she saw him. An Apache warrior sat on a painted horse, but he wasn't dressed for war. His face was unpainted, his long black hair loose around his shoulders. He looked to be about her age, with strong features and eyes that seemed to hold old sorrows. In his hands he held a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. They stared at each other for a long moment, neither moving. Maria should have been terrified. She should have screamed for the guards or run back to the house. Instead, she found herself taking a step closer. The warrior spoke softly in Spanish, his accent thick but his words clear. "You are hurt." Maria looked down at herself, confused. Then she realized he was looking at her hands, which were cut and bleeding from the rough work Victoria demanded. The cuts had reopened while she was gardening, and blood was seeping through the dirt on her palms. "It's nothing," she said quietly, also in Spanish. He shook his head and dismounted, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. Up close, she could see that he too bore fresh wounds. A gash on his left arm that had been roughly bandaged, scratches on his face from riding through thorny brush. "You help me, I help you," he said, holding up the leather bundle. Every instinct told Maria this was dangerous. If Victor or his men found her talking to an Apache warrior, especially one who might have been part of the raid, She would be in more trouble than she could imagine. But something in the warrior's eyes spoke to her, a recognition of shared pain that went deeper than the surface wounds they both carried. She nodded. He opened the leather bundle, revealing an assortment of plants, roots, and what looked like crushed berries mixed with animal fat. His movements were careful and practiced as he selected different items and began crushing them together with a small stone. "Your name?" he asked while he worked. "Maria. And yours?" "Nalnish. It means he who works hard in my language." He finished preparing the medicine and held out his hand for hers. Maria hesitated for just a moment, then placed her wounded palm in his. His touch was gentle as he cleaned the cuts with water from a small gourd, and then applied the herbal mixture. The medicine stung at first, then brought a cooling relief she hadn't felt in months. "Why are you helping me?" she asked as he wrapped her hands with strips of clean cloth. Nalnish was quiet for a long time, finishing his work on her hands before answering. 3 days ago when we came for the horses, I saw you. You were hanging clothes, and when you heard us coming, you ran to warn the woman in the big house. You could have hidden and saved only yourself, but you tried to save her too." Maria thought back to that morning. Yes, she had run to warn Victoria, though the other woman had never thanked her for it. "She treats you badly," Nalnish continued. "I watched from the hill and saw how she speaks to you, like you are worth nothing. But I see different. I see someone with a good heart who helps even those who hurt her." "How do you know how she treats me?" "I have been watching," he admitted. "My people, we took only what was ours. Those horses were stolen from us many seasons ago. We came to take back what belonged to us. But I stayed to understand this place, and I saw you." They heard voices from the direction of the main house, and Nalnish quickly gathered his medicines back into the bundle. But before he mounted his horse, he looked directly into Maria's eyes. "I too know what it is to be cast out," he said quietly. "To be told you are worth nothing. My people sent me away because I spoke against a war chief who led young men to their deaths for his own glory. They said I was no longer Apache because I would not follow blindly." Maria felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition so deep it was almost painful. "You're alone too?" "Yes, but alone does not mean worthless. This I am still learning." He mounted his horse and turned to go, then paused. "I will come again tomorrow night, same time. If you want healing for the wounds inside as well as outside, meet me here." "Why would you risk coming back?" Nalnish smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Because sometimes the best medicine is knowing you are not the only one." He rode away as silently as he had come, disappearing into the gathering dusk like a shadow. That night, Maria lay on her narrow cot looking at her bandaged hands. The cuts had stopped hurting for the first time in weeks, but more than that, something inside her felt different. For so long, she had believed what everyone told her about her worthlessness. Her parents, Diego, Victoria, even the voice in her own head that whispered cruel things in the dark hours before dawn. But Nalnish had looked at her and seen something else. Not a barren failure, but someone with a good heart, someone worth helping. The next evening, she was waiting by the shed when he arrived. This time he brought food as well as medicine, dried meat, nuts, and a bread made from ground acorns that was unlike anything she had ever tasted. They sat together in the small space behind the shed, sharing the meal and talking in quiet voices. "Tell me about your people," Maria said. "We are the Chiricahua Apache," Nalnish explained. "We have lived in these mountains and deserts for more generations than anyone can count. We know every water source, every safe path, every plant that heals, and every one that harms. This land is our mother, and we are her children. It must be beautiful living free like that. Beautiful and hard. Freedom always costs something. For my people, it costs the lives of young men who die fighting for land that should never have needed fighting for. For me, it cost my place among my own people when I said this war was wrong." Maria told him about her own exile, about being sold by her parents because she couldn't bear children, about Diego's eagerness to be rid of her and Victoria's daily cruelty. "In your culture," she asked, "are women who can't have children considered worthless?" Nalnish looked shocked by the question. "No. Among my people, a woman's worth comes from many things. Her wisdom, her skills, her courage, her kindness. Some of our greatest leaders have been women who never bore children, but who guided and protected our people in other ways." The idea was so foreign to everything Maria had been taught that she could barely grasp it. But how do families continue? How do names get passed down? Children are raised by the whole community. A woman who cannot bear her own children often becomes the one who teaches all the children, or who cares for the elders. or who keeps the healing knowledge alive. Every person has gifts that serve the people. They met like this for a week, always after dark, always careful not to be seen. Nalnish brought different medicines each time, healing not just her physical wounds but teaching her about plants and their properties. Maria began to see her secret garden differently, understanding which of her plants might have healing power she had never recognized. More importantly, she began to see herself differently. Through Nalnish's eyes, she was not a failure, but simply a person whose gifts lay in directions other than childbearing. A person with value that existed independent of anyone else's opinion. "My wife died giving birth to our first child," Nalnish told her one evening. "Both she and the baby. For a long time I thought it was my fault, that I was cursed, that any woman who loved me would die because of it. Do you still believe that? No. Now I understand that some things happen that are no one's fault. Sadness is part of life, like joy and anger and fear. It doesn't mean we are being punished." On the 7th night, Nalnish brought news that changed everything. "My watchers tell me that the rancher is planning to hunt us down. He has hired more men, and they ride out tomorrow to track us to our camp." Maria's blood went cold. "Will you be safe?" "We will move deeper into the mountains. But I will not be able to come back here for many weeks, maybe months." The thought of returning to her old isolation, to having only Victoria's cruelty and her own dark thoughts for company, made Maria feel sick. "I wish I could come with you," she said without thinking. Nalnish looked at her seriously. "You could? What?" "You could come with me. Learn to live free instead of like a slave." Maria stared at him, her mind reeling. Leave the ranch? Leave everything she had ever known? It was impossible. It was crazy, it was tempting. "I can't," she said finally. "I owe 2 years of work to pay my family's debt. You owe nothing to people who sold you like cattle. But if I leave, my family will lose their ranch." "They'll have nothing," Nalnish nodded sadly. "This is why you have a good heart. Even those who hurt you, you try to protect." He reached into his medicine bundle and pulled out the eagle feather she had seen him leave after the raid. "Keep this. When you are ready to choose your own path instead of the path others have chosen for you, hold this feather and call my name. I will find you." 2 months passed without any sign of Nalnish, and Maria began to wonder if their meetings had been nothing more than a dream, born from her desperate loneliness. The eagle feather remained hidden in her small wooden crate, wrapped carefully in cloth, but she began to doubt that she would ever have reason to use it. Victor's hunting parties had returned empty-handed week after week, their horses lathered with sweat and their tempers growing shorter with each failed attempt to track down the Apache who had taken his prize horses. The men spoke in hushed voices about how the warriors seemed to vanish into the landscape like ghosts, leaving no trail that even the best trackers could follow. "It's like they just disappear into thin air," complained Jake, one of the newer hands Victor had hired specifically for hunting Apache. "We find tracks, follow them for miles, and then nothing. Like the earth just swallowed them up." Victoria's mood had grown even darker, if such a thing were possible. The failed hunting expeditions meant that Victor spent more time at the ranch, and his presence made her more demanding and cruel than ever. She seemed to take out her frustrations about the missing horses on Maria, finding fault with everything and increasing the workload until Maria was working from before dawn until well after midnight. "Those savages made fools of my husband," Victoria would say while watching Maria scrub the same floor for the 3rd time. "And you probably helped them, didn't you? Probably signaled them somehow when you were supposed to be working." Maria had learned not to respond to these accusations. Anything she said would only make things worse. Instead, she focused on her work and tried to find small moments of peace in her secret garden, which had grown larger and more productive over the months. The plants seemed to thrive despite the poor soil, as if they understood that this small patch of earth was her only sanctuary. It was while she was tending her garden on a crisp October evening that she heard the familiar sound of a horse approaching. Her heart leaped, but when she looked up she saw not Nalnish but 3 of Victor's men riding hard toward the main house. Their horses were foam-flecked and exhausted, and the men themselves looked like they had been riding for days without rest. Maria crept closer to the house, staying in the shadows where she could hear but not be seen. "We found their camp," Jake was saying as he dismounted, "about 30 miles north up in the high country where the canyons get real narrow." Victor appeared on the porch, his face eager with anticipation. "How many?" "Maybe 20 warriors plus women and children. They're holed up in a box canyon with only one way in or out. We can surround them easy. When do we ride? Boss wants to attack at dawn. Hit them while they're still sleeping. We got enough men now to finish this once and for all. Maria felt her blood turn to ice water. Tomorrow at dawn, Victor and his hired guns were going to attack Nalnish's people. There would be no mercy shown, she knew. Victor was the kind of man who believed the only good Apache was a dead Apache. She had to warn them somehow. But how? She didn't even know where this canyon was, and she certainly couldn't ride out alone across 30 miles of dangerous territory. She would be lost within an hour, and even if she somehow found the way, she would arrive too late to do any good. That night, she lay awake on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling and trying to think of any possible solution. The eagle feather seemed to burn where it lay hidden in her crate, but calling Nalnish's name felt foolish. How could he possibly hear her across so many miles? Just before dawn, she heard the sounds of men preparing for war. Horses being saddled, weapons being checked, supplies being loaded. Through her small window, she could see the dark shapes moving around the corral in the gray pre-dawn light. Desperate now, Maria slipped out of her room and crept to her garden. There, surrounded by the plants she had nurtured with her own hands, she pulled out the eagle feather and held it up toward the lightening sky. "Nalnish," she whispered, feeling foolish even as she did it. "I need you. Your people are in danger." Nothing happened. The feather remained just a feather, and the sounds of the war party continued from the yard. Maria was about to give up when she heard it. A soft sound like someone clearing their throat coming from behind the storage shed. Her heart hammering, she crept toward the sound. Nalnish stepped out of the shadows, leading his horse. He looked older somehow, thinner, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of hard months in the mountains. "You called," he said simply. "How did you hear me? How are you here?" "I never left completely. My friends and I, we take turns watching this place. We knew the rancher was planning something big when he hired so many new men." "Then you know about the attack?" "Yes, they found our camp yesterday, but we saw them watching us. We are already moving the women and children to safety. The warriors will lead the attackers on a chase through the mountains until they give up." Relief flooded through Maria so strongly her knees almost buckled. "So everyone will be safe?" Nalnish's expression grew serious. "The people will be safe, yes. But this changes everything. We cannot stay in this territory anymore. The hunting parties will keep coming, and eventually they might succeed. We must go far north into the lands where the snow never melts completely, where white men do not want to live." "How far north?" "Very far. It will be a hard journey, and we may not all survive it." Maria felt something breaking inside her chest.
"So this is goodbye. It could be." Nalnish stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper.
"Or you could come with us. I told you before I can't. My family's debt. Your family sold you to pay a debt they created. You owe them nothing. But if I leave, they'll lose everything. And if you stay, you will lose everything. Your spirit, your hope, maybe even your life. The woman in the big house, she grows more cruel every day. How long before her anger kills you?" Maria knew he was right. Victoria's treatment had grown steadily worse, and there were days when Maria wondered if she would survive another year of such cruelty. But leaving felt like such a huge step, such a complete abandonment of everything she had ever been taught about duty and family obligation. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "I don't know how to live like you do. I don't know your ways, your language. What if I can't keep up? What if I become a burden?" "Fear is wise," Nalnish said. "Fear keeps you alive, but you cannot let it keep you from living." The sounds from the ranch yard were growing louder. Soon Victor and his men would ride out, and this chance would be lost forever. "If I come with you," Maria said, her voice shaking. "What would my life be like?" "Hard," Nalnish said honestly. "Cold in winter, hot in summer, always moving, always watching for danger. But also free. You would learn to read the signs in the sky that tell when storms are coming. You would know which plants heal and which ones harm. You would see sunrises from mountaintops that no white person has ever climbed. And you? What would you and I be to each other?" Nalnish was quiet for a long moment. "Whatever we choose to be. Among my people, a woman chooses her own husband and she can leave him if he treats her badly. Marriage is a partnership, not ownership." The war party was mounting up now. Maria could hear Victor shouting orders to his men. "I need to get something," she said suddenly. She ran back to her tiny room and grabbed her few possessions, including her grandmother's rosary and the last letter her mother had sent months ago. Then she hurried to her garden and quickly dug up some of the best seeds, wrapping them in a piece of cloth. When she returned to Nalnish, he was holding his horse ready. "Are you sure?" he asked. Maria thought about Victoria's cruelty, about her parents' willingness to sell her, about Diego's eagerness to be rid of his barren wife. Then she thought about the freedom in Nalnish's eyes and the possibility of a life where her worth wasn't measured by her ability to bear children. "I'm sure." Nalnish helped her mount behind him, and they rode quickly away from the ranch as the sun rose behind them. As they crested the first hill, Maria looked back one last time at the place that had been her prison for almost a year. "Any regrets?" Nalnish asked. Maria thought about it seriously. She was leaving behind everything familiar, riding into an uncertain future with a man she barely knew, choosing a life completely different from anything she had ever imagined. "No," she said, and realized she meant it. No regrets. They rode hard all morning, taking paths that seemed to exist only in Nalnish's memory. By the time Victor and his men discovered that their prey had vanished once again, Maria and Nalnish were already deep in the mountains, following trails that wound through canyons and over ridges that seemed to touch the sky itself. For the first time in her adult life, Maria was choosing her own destiny. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, like jumping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. Living in the wilderness was nothing like Maria had imagined. The romance of riding off into the sunset with Nalnish had lasted exactly until the first night, when she realized that sleeping on the hard ground with only a thin blanket meant waking up stiff, cold, and covered with dirt that seemed to get into places she didn't even know existed. The first week was the hardest. Every muscle in her body ached from riding for long hours over rough terrain. Her hands, softened by months of indoor work despite the harsh treatment, blistered from helping to set up and break down their simple camps. Her back screamed from sleeping on rocks and roots, and her stomach cramped from eating unfamiliar foods that her body didn't know how to digest. "I thought I was strong," she confessed to Nalnish on the fourth night as she rubbed her sore feet. "At the ranch, I thought the hard work had made me tough." "Ranch work makes you strong in one way," he replied, mixing a paste from crushed leaves to soothe her blisters. "Mountain work makes you strong in different ways. Your body will learn. What if it doesn't? What if I can't keep up with your people?" Nalnish paused in his work and looked at her seriously. "Do you want to go back?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Go back? To Victoria's cruelty in her tiny windowless room? To being treated like property that could be bought and sold? The very thought made her feel sick. "No," she said firmly. "Never." "Then you will learn," he said simply. "Because you must." And somehow, gradually, she did learn. Nalnish was an endlessly patient teacher. He showed her how to read the landscape, how to spot the almost invisible signs that indicated water nearby or warned of dangerous animals. He taught her which plants could be eaten safely and which ones would make her sick, how to prepare meat so it would last for days without spoiling, how to build a fire that would provide warmth without creating smoke that could be seen from miles away. "See how the grass grows differently here?" he said one morning, pointing to a patch of ground that looked identical to every other patch to Maria's untrained eyes. "This means there is water underground. If we dig here, we will find it within a few feet." He was right. They always found water where he said they would, always found game trails where he predicted them, always managed to stay ahead of any pursuit by taking paths that seemed to exist only in his memory. But more than survival skills, Nalnish taught her to see herself differently. "You move through the world like you are apologizing for taking up space," he told her one evening as they sat by their small fire. "Why?" "Because that's what I was taught. Women should be quiet, should not draw attention to themselves, should make themselves small so men can feel big. That is not our way. Apache women are strong, loud when they need to be, fierce in protecting what matters to them. They take up exactly the space they need and make no apologies for it." It was a foreign concept, but gradually Maria began to understand what he meant. When she walked, she started lifting her head instead of watching the ground. When she spoke, she stopped prefacing every sentence with "I'm sorry" or "I might be wrong." But when she needed help with something, she asked directly instead of hinting and hoping someone would notice. The change didn't happen overnight, but it did happen, and as her confidence grew, so did her skills. 3 weeks into their journey, they caught up with the rest of Nalnish's band. Maria had been nervous about meeting his people, wondering if they would accept her or see her as an unwelcome burden. But the reality was more complex than simple acceptance or rejection. The women were curious about her, examining her clothes and her pale skin with frank interest. The men largely ignored her, which she learned was actually a sign of respect rather than rudeness. The children, however, were fascinated by her, following her around and chattering in Apache while she tried to help with camp chores. They want to know if your hair is really that color or if you paint it. Nalnish translated as a group of young girls touched Maria's brown hair with wonder. Tell them it's real. But it gets lighter in the sun. The children found this hilarious for reasons Maria didn't understand, but their laughter was infectious and she found herself laughing with them. The band's leader was an older woman named Desba, whose name meant goes to war. She had been leading this group since her husband was killed in a cavalry attack 2 years earlier, and she ruled with a combination of fierce protectiveness and practical wisdom. "You are the Mexican woman who warned Nalnish about the attack," she said to Maria through translation. This was good. "But now you are here, and being here means you must contribute. Can you work?" "Yes," Maria said without hesitation. "I can work. We will see." And they did see. Over the following weeks, as the band moved steadily north through increasingly rough terrain, Maria proved herself in ways she had never imagined possible. Her experience in Victoria's kitchen translated surprisingly well to cooking, over open fires with limited ingredients. Her knowledge of plants, gained from her secret garden, helped her identify edible roots and berries that supplemented their diet. Most importantly, her willingness to do whatever needed doing without complaint earned her the grudging respect of the other women. But it was her relationship with Nalnish that truly transformed her. In her marriage to Diego, she had been expected to be quiet, submissive, grateful for any attention he chose to give her. She was supposed to serve his needs and ask for nothing in return. The idea that her own needs and desires mattered had never even occurred to her. With Nalnish, everything was different. "What do you think about this campsite?" he would ask when they were scouting ahead of the main band. "I think," she would begin, then stop herself. "I mean, you would know better than I would. I asked what you think, not what I know. Your eyes see things mine might miss." It took time for her to believe that he really wanted her opinion, that her thoughts and observations had value, but gradually she began to trust that when he asked her something, he genuinely wanted to know her answer. "I think that grove of trees would be better," she said one evening when he asked about camping spots. "The one you picked is more protected from the wind, but those trees have more deadfall for firewood, and the ground slopes away from where we would sleep so rainwater won't pool around us." Nalnish studied both locations again, then smiled. "You are right. Your choice is better." "Really? Really? You are learning to think like the land instead of fighting against it." These small moments of validation built up over time like drops of water gradually filling a container. Maria began to realize that she was intelligent, that her observations were often accurate, that she had skills and insights that were valuable. When winter began to close in and they reached the high country where they would wait out the cold months, Maria had become someone she barely recognized from the broken woman who had fled the Blackwood Ranch. She could start a fire in wet conditions, track small game through rocky terrain, and identify dozens of useful plants. She could ride all day without falling behind the group and set up a weatherproof shelter in minutes. She could speak enough Apache to have basic conversations and enough Spanish to translate when needed. But more than the practical skills, she had learned to value herself. "Do you miss your old life?" Nalnish asked one night as they lay together under the stars, sharing warmth in the bitter mountain cold. "I miss some people sometimes," Maria said honestly. "I wonder if my parents ever think about me, if they regret what they did. I wonder if Diego found a wife who could give him children. But miss that life? No, never. Even though this life is harder? This life is harder, yes. But it's mine. I choose when to get up, where to go, what to do with my time. I choose who to love and how to love them. I never had choices before. And do you? Love someone, I mean?" Maria turned to look at him in the starlight. This man who had saved her in more ways than one, who had taught her to see her own worth, who treated her as an equal partner in this strange new life they were building together. "Yes," she said simply, "I do. Even though I cannot offer you a fine house or expensive clothes or security, you offer me something better. You offer me freedom." When Nalnish kissed her under the vast canopy of stars, Maria felt something she had never experienced before, Not just desire or affection, but the deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right person, living exactly the life she was meant to live. Te amo, she whispered against his lips. And I love you, he replied in English, then repeated it in Apache. Aya Ayana go. The winter that followed was the hardest thing Maria had ever endured, but also the most beautiful. Trapped in their mountain shelter by blizzards that could last for days, she and Nalnish grew closer than she had ever imagined possible with another human being. They shared not just physical warmth, but dreams, fears, stories from their past, and hopes for whatever future awaited them. And somewhere in the depths of that brutal, beautiful winter, Maria realized something that changed everything. She was pregnant. Not with the child of a man who saw her as property, but with the child of the man she loved, conceived in freedom and carried with joy. For the first time in her life, the possibility of motherhood felt like a gift rather than a duty. Spring came late to the high mountains, but when it finally arrived, it brought more than just melting snow and budding trees. It brought messengers, and with them, impossible choices that would test everything Maria and Nalnish had built together. The first messenger arrived on a warm morning in late April, when Maria was outside the winter shelter gathering early spring greens that would help fight off the effects of their limited winter diet. She had been feeling sick in the mornings lately, though she hadn't yet told Nalnish about her suspicions regarding the cause. The rider was young, barely more than a boy, but he bore the markings of an official Apache messenger. He spoke urgently with Desba and the other elders, his words too fast and too formal for Maria to follow with her still limited Apache. But she could read the tension in everyone's faces. "What news?" Nalnish asked when he returned from the council gathering. "The cavalry has been asking questions about us all winter," Desba explained, switching to Spanish so Maria could understand. "They know we are somewhere in these mountains, and they are planning a major campaign to find us when the snow melts enough for their horses." "How major?" Nalnish asked. 3 companies of soldiers plus Apache scouts from the reservations. They mean to end this once and for all. The news settled over the camp like a dark cloud. Everyone had known this day might come, but that didn't make it easier to face. "There is more," Desba continued. "The boy brings word from the great chiefs. They are calling for all the scattered bands to come together, to make one final stand or to accept the terms the white men offer." "What terms?" "Surrender. Go to the reservation. Give up our weapons and our horses and our freedom, and they will let us live." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of an impossible decision. Maria had learned enough about Apache history to understand what the reservations meant. Confined spaces where proud free people were forced to live like prisoners, dependent on government supplies that often didn't come, forbidden from practicing their traditional ways, watched constantly by soldiers who saw them as potential threats rather than human beings. "And if we refuse?" Nalnish asked quietly. "Then we keep running until there is nowhere left to run. And when they finally corner us, we fight until there is no one left to fight." That evening, around the council fire, the debate raged for hours. Some argued for accepting the reservation, pointing out that their children might have a chance to grow up even if it meant giving up the old ways. Others insisted that life without freedom was not life at all, that it would be better to die fighting than to live as prisoners. Maria listened, but did not speak. This was not her decision to make, and she knew it. But as the night wore on and the arguments grew more heated, she found herself thinking about the life growing inside her. What kind of world would she bring this child into? The second messenger arrived 3 days later, and this one wore the uniform of the U.S. Army. He came under a flag of truce escorted by 2 Apache scouts, and his message was for Maria specifically. "There's a bounty on your head," he told her bluntly, speaking in English. "Victor Blackwood has offered $1,000 for your return, dead or alive. He claims you murdered 2 of his men during your escape." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not true. I never hurt anyone." "Maybe not, but he's convinced the territorial governor that you're a dangerous fugitive who has joined with hostile Indians. There are wanted posters with your description in every town from here to Mexico." The messenger reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded paper. Maria's heart sank as she saw her own face staring back at her, sketched from Victor's description. The reward offered was more money than most people in the territory would see in a lifetime. "However," the messenger continued, "the army is prepared to be reasonable. Surrender yourself voluntarily, and we'll make sure you get a fair trial." The charges might not stick if you have a good lawyer. And if I don't surrender, then every bounty hunter and fortune seeker in the territory will be looking for you. And they won't care much about bringing you back alive. After the messenger left, Maria sat by the stream that ran near their camp, staring at the wanted poster and trying to make sense of how her life had become so complicated. She had gone from being sold as property to being hunted as a criminal, and now her presence was putting Nalnish and his people in even greater danger. "You are thinking of leaving," Nalnish said, settling down beside her on the bank. "How did you know?" "I know you. You have the same look you had the night you decided to warn me about the attack on our camp. You are thinking about sacrificing yourself to protect others." Maria folded the poster and tucked it into her dress. "Maybe I should. If I surrender, they'll stop hunting your people for harboring me. You could negotiate better terms for the reservation, and you would go to prison or hang for crimes you didn't commit. Better than all of us dying because of me." Nalnish was quiet for a long moment, throwing pebbles into the stream and watching the ripples spread outward. "There is something else to consider now," he said finally. "What do you mean?" "I have eyes, Maria. I see how you turn green in the mornings, how you have missed your monthly bleeding, how you touch your belly when you think no one is watching. We are going to have a child." Maria's secret was out, but instead of feeling exposed, she felt relieved. "You knew?" "I suspected. And now I'm certain." He turned to face her fully. "This changes everything. We are not just choosing our own fate anymore. We are choosing our child's fate as well." Over the next week, the pressure mounted from all sides. More messengers arrived, both Apache and military, each bringing news that made their situation more desperate. The army was mobilizing for their spring offensive. More bounty hunters were arriving in the territory. Even some of the Apache bands were beginning to negotiate surrender terms, but the hardest pressure came from within their own group. "The Mexican woman must go," declared Chato, one of the older warriors. "Her presence brings the soldiers down on all of us. Send her back to her own people. She is one of us now," Nalnish replied firmly. "She has proven herself in the mountains, learned our ways, contributed to our survival." "She is not Apache," Chato shot back. "She never will be. And now she carries a half-breed child that will belong to neither world." The words stung Maria deeply, but she forced herself to remain silent. This was an argument that Nalnish needed to have without her interference. "My child will belong to whatever world we create for it," Nalnish said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Just as Maria belongs to the world she has chosen to live in." But not everyone agreed, and the division in the group grew deeper each day. Finally, Desba called for a final council. "We cannot keep running forever," she announced. "The old ways are ending whether we accept it or not. The question is whether we end with them or find a way to carry something forward." The debate that followed was unlike anything Maria had witnessed. For the first time she was asked to speak, to tell the council what she thought they should do. "I think," she said carefully, choosing her words in her still imperfect Apache, "that sometimes the bravest thing is not to fight or to surrender, but to find a third choice that no one else has thought of." "What third choice?" Desba asked. "I don't know yet, but I know that good people shouldn't have to choose between freedom and survival. There should be a way to have both." After the council, Maria and Nalnish walked away from the camp to talk privately. The weight of all the impossible choices pressed down on them like the mountain itself. "What do we do?" Maria asked. "I don't know," Nalnish admitted, "but I know I won't lose you. Not to the army, not to bounty hunters, not to my own people if they cannot accept you. Whatever we decide together. Even if it means giving up everything. Everything I care about is right here," he said, taking her hand and placing it over her still flat belly. "You and our child. Everything else we can rebuild." That night, as they lay together under the stars, Maria felt the weight of the future pressing down on them. Tomorrow they would have to choose between surrendering to a world that saw them as criminals, fighting a war they couldn't win, or finding some impossible third option that might not even exist. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, with the man she loved and the child they had created together. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it as a family. "No matter what happens," she whispered to Nalnish as sleep finally claimed them, "promise me our child will know what freedom feels like." "I promise," he whispered back. "Whatever it takes." The answer came to Maria in a dream, or maybe it was the voice of her unborn child speaking through her heart. Either way, she woke before dawn with a clarity that felt like sunlight breaking through storm. Clouds. I know what we have to do, she told Nalnish as he stirred beside her. Tell me, we don't choose between the two worlds that are hunting us. We create our own world. Nalnish sat up, studying her face in the pale pre-dawn light. Explain. Maria took a deep breath, organizing the thoughts that had crystallized during her sleep. There are others like us. People who don't fit in either world. Apache who have been cast out for questioning the old ways. Mexicans who refuse to bow to the big ranchers. Maybe even some whites who are tired of the endless fighting. What if we brought them together? Where? How? Remember that box canyon where your people were camped when Victor's men found you? The one with only one way in or out. What if we found a place like that, but better hidden? A place where people could live free without constantly running? Nalnish was quiet for a long time, thinking. It would be dangerous. We would have no protection if we were discovered. We have no protection now, at least this way. We would be choosing our own risk instead of having it chosen for us. When they presented the idea to Desba and the council, the reaction was mixed. Some thought it was a foolish dream that would get them all killed. Others saw it as the only alternative to surrender or endless flight. You speak of creating a new world, Chato said skeptically. But worlds are not created by a handful of outcasts hiding in the mountains. All great things start small, Maria replied. Your own people were once just a small band trying to survive in harsh country. They grew strong because they adapted, because they found new ways to live when the old ways weren't enough. She has a point, Desba said thoughtfully. And what do we have to lose? We are already refugees with no home. The debate continued for 3 days, but in the end, the decision was made by practical necessity. Scouts reported that the army offensive was beginning, with columns of soldiers moving into the mountains from 3 different directions. The band had to move immediately, and their choices were limited to north, south, or deeper into the wilderness. We go deeper, Desba announced. If we are going to try this new path, we need to find the right place to try it. What followed was the most difficult journey of Maria's life. As her pregnancy progressed, the constant travel over rough terrain became increasingly challenging. But she was no longer the soft ranch woman who had struggled through her first weeks in the wilderness. Months of mountain living had made her strong, and the support of the other women helped her endure. They traveled mostly at night, following paths that existed only in the memories of the oldest members of the band. They avoided water sources where they might encounter other travelers, instead finding hidden springs and tiny streams that appeared on no maps. They moved like ghosts through landscape that seemed untouched by human presence. After 2 weeks of this careful travel, they found it. The canyon was deeper and more protected than any they had seen before, accessible only through a narrow crack in the rock face that could easily be missed even by someone looking for it. Inside, the walls opened up to reveal a hidden valley with a year-round stream, natural cave shelters, and enough grazing to support horses and even some cattle. This place has been sacred to my people for generations, explained one of the older women. It was where we came for vision quests, where young people went to find their adult names. The spirits here are friendly to those who respect them. More importantly, it was completely invisible from the outside. Even if someone climbed to the tops of the surrounding peaks, they would see nothing but an endless expanse of stone and forest. This could work, Nalnish said as they explored the valley, but we would need more people. A community this isolated needs to be large enough to be self-sufficient. Then we find more people, Maria said. People like us who need a place to belong. Over the following months, as Maria's pregnancy advanced and the hidden valley became their home, word spread quietly through the network of outcasts and misfits that existed on the edges of civilization. They came one by one or in small groups, each bringing their own skills and their own stories of rejection or persecution. Roberto arrived first, the old ranch hand who had shown Maria small kindnesses at the Blackwood Ranch. He had been fired for defending her when Victoria's cruelty became too much to watch, and he brought news that Victor had eventually given up the search for the stolen horses and the runaway woman who had supposedly helped steal them. The truth is, Roberto said with a grin, the man was too cheap to keep paying all those bounty hunters when nothing was turning up. And his wife finally drove away the last of the ranch hands with her meanness. They're struggling now. A Mexican family arrived next, fleeing debt slavery similar to what Maria had escaped. Then came a young Apache man who had been exiled for refusing to participate in a raid against innocent settlers. A white woman appeared with her mixed-race children, running from a town that wouldn't accept her family. A former cavalry soldier, disgusted by orders to attack peaceful villages, brought his skills and his guilt. Each new arrival strengthened the community, but also tested Maria's growing role as one of its leaders. She had never imagined herself in such a position, but her ability to speak multiple languages and her experience surviving in both the white and Apache worlds made her a natural bridge between different groups. "You have become what you never thought you could be," Nalnish told her one evening as they watched their mixed community working together to build permanent shelters before winter arrived. "A leader? I'm not a leader," Maria protested. "I'm just trying to help people figure out how to live together." That is exactly what a leader does. The hardest test came when Maria went into labor in the depths of winter, with snow blocking the entrance to their valley and no way to get outside help if something went wrong. But the community rallied around her, with the Apache women bringing their traditional birthing knowledge and the Mexican women contributing their own healing practices. When her daughter was finally born after a long and difficult labor, Maria held the tiny, perfect baby and felt a joy so profound it seemed to light up the entire valley. "What will you name her?" asked Desba, who had served as the chief midwife. Maria looked at the child's face, so peaceful and beautiful, then at Nalnish, whose eyes were bright with tears of happiness. "Esperanza," she said finally. "Hope?" And her Apache name? "Bike Hoju," Nalnish said softly. According to her, there is beauty. As Esperanza grew from infant to toddler, the Hidden Valley community flourished around her. Gardens produced abundant food in the rich valley soil. Workshops produced everything from tools to clothing. Children from different cultures played together, learning each other's languages and customs as naturally as they learned to walk. But perhaps most importantly, they had created something entirely new. A place where a person's worth wasn't measured by their race, their past, or their ability to bear children, but by their willingness to contribute to the common good and treat others with respect. "Look what we've built," Maria said to Nalnish one summer evening as they sat outside their home, watching Esperanza toddle around the central plaza where the evening's community meal was being prepared. The Hidden Valley now housed nearly 50 people of various backgrounds, all working together to create a life none of them could have imagined alone. There were workshops where Apache beadwork was traded for Mexican pottery, where former soldiers taught tactics to former enemies, where children learned to read in 3 languages. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had stayed at the ranch?" Nalnish asked. Maria considered the question seriously. "I think I would have died there one way or another. Maybe not my body, but my spirit. Everything that made me who I really am. And now I know who I really am. A mother, a leader, a bridge between worlds. Someone who helps lost people find their way home. Even though this life is harder than the safe one you could have had." "Safe?" Maria laughed. "There was nothing safe about that life. I was trapped, owned, sold like property. This life has dangers, yes, but they are honest dangers that we face together as a community. That's not harder. That's better." Years passed, and their Hidden Valley became a legend whispered about in towns and trading posts across the territory. Some said it was a myth, a story told by people who had given up hope of finding a better life. Others claimed to have met travelers who had been there, who spoke of a place where different people lived together in peace. Occasionally, someone would find them. Usually, these were people drawn by the legend, seeking refuge from their own forms of persecution or exile. The community had developed careful ways of evaluating newcomers, ensuring that only those who truly understood and accepted their values were allowed to stay. Esperanza grew up trilingual and fearless, equally comfortable hunting with Apache techniques, cooking Mexican dishes, or reading from the books that various members brought to their small but growing library. She was living proof that the boundaries between cultures existed mainly in people's minds, not in the hearts of children who knew no prejudice.